When the odds are against you, do you give up and hope for the best, or do you try and put up a fight? Your answer determines whether or not you're a survivor, whether you'd be able to endure when the odds are against you. The following three tales follow people that shouldn't have persevered. Did they really look death in the face and against all odds pull through? Or did we spin these stories up for your entertainment? It's time to find out whether you could decide what's fact or fiction.
The line that divides the factual from the unreal has long since blurred. The tales we once thought fantastical, now implanted as true. To decipher verity from the imagined, you must break from the ordinary and consider a universe where the outlandish prevails. Can you expand your mind to see beyond our perceived reality? Can you decide what's fact or fiction?
Just how deadly can Mother Nature be? Mitchell Greenberg and Brandon Thomas found out the hard way while trying to enjoy the peace and quiet of the wild at the base of a very well-known natural formation. In an instant, their experience took a turn for the worst.
Many people weren't alive or couldn't remember what they were doing on May 18, 1980, but it's a day that Mitchell Greenberg won't soon forget. It wasn't a trip he had been excited about, but his close friend, Brandon Thomas, insisted that they forego the beach and try for something adventurous, a once-in-a-lifetime expedition in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. The two traveled with a group of 8, though they all set up camp separate from one another. They spent only one day in River Glen, a quiet campsite near the base of the towering volcano. The morning after enjoying the peacefulness of nature and sharing stories over a campfire, Mitchell and Brandon awoke to an unexpected event. Mitchell didn't see it at first, but when he saw the terror in his friend's eyes, he knew something bad was happening. The sky, just beyond the tree-lined campsite, was blocked by a red cloud that rose from the peak of Mount St. Helens. The pair rushed from their campsite in a panic just as the ground started to quake. Amidst the chaos that followed, Mitchell lost track of Brandon after being knocked to the ground by a heavy wave of ash. Ice and snow barreled over Mitchell from the snowy natural formation, freezing him in just seconds. His body underwent another drastic temperature change when the heat from the volcanic eruption finally reached him. The intensity started to blister his hands, forcing him to frantically crawl his way to the nearby river for relief. As he soaked his hands, he scanned the clearing, hoping to find Brandon. Instead, he only saw the destructive force of nature. Ash dropped from the sky like snowfall, clouding his vision. Pockets of hot orange burst around him, engulfing him in an unexpected hell. Knowing there was no surviving just by hiding near the river, Mitchell struggled against the worsening conditions to find Brandon and safety. Breathing grew difficult as the ash grew even thicker. But despite all that stood in his way, Mitchell found Brandon hiding beneath tree limbs. Rendered immobile from his broken hip, the two sat together on the pile of branches, each one praying for an impossible rescue. They prolonged the inevitable by breathing through their shirts, hoping to keep their lungs clear of the volcanic ash. Hope had long been lost when, through the thick cloud of gray, Mitchell saw 2 figures approaching them. One pair of friends they traveled with, Jonathan Reese and Rose Nelson, had found their way through the eruption to Mitchell and Brandon's campsite. Together, the 3 were able to build a shelter for Brandon before setting off to find help. For nearly 11 miles, Mitchell walked through the devastated landscape before finding a family of hikers that were able to call in a rescue. Mitchell, Brandon, Jonathan, and Rose survived the ordeal, each one walking away with their own emotional or physical scars.
The eruption of Mount St. Helens was a well-known ordeal, but is it possible that Michael and company were trapped within it? To survive the abundance of ash and the incredible heat sounds unlikely, but does that mean it didn't and couldn't have happened? We'll get to the reveal in a few, but for now, vote what you think by using the on-screen poll and let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Our second story deals with a horror that is still relevant today: the poor conditions of garment factories around the world. If you are unaware of these horrible conditions, pay attention to this story of Hasina Anand. Forced to work in an overcrowded building for minimal pay, Hasina witnessed firsthand the result of such an environment.
It wasn't a feeling she was accustomed to, especially after several years in the cramped factory. The building seemed to sway, a motion that should have been impossible for the stubby structure. Hasina looked around to make sure she wasn't the only one to have felt it, and judging by the look on her neighbors' faces, she wasn't. There was an uncomfortable silence for a very brief moment before the building moved again, this time far more drastic. Hasina heard the floor give way before the feeling of falling hit her. By the time she could comprehend what was happening, the sun that had been peering through nearby windows was completely blacked out, and her lungs were filled with a thick dust. Screams were stifled by the sound of the collapsing building, and within seconds, all Hasina could hear was the sound of her heart beating frantically as she dropped through the crumbling building. It all went silent suddenly when she struck the bottom, her head slamming against the solid surface. The headache was unbearable when she finally came to, but it didn't keep Hasina from being able to grasp just how dire her situation was. Nothing but pitch black surrounded her. There was no telling how long she had been knocked out, but as she started to rustle in her spot, trapped beneath the rubble, she quickly realized she wasn't the only one alive. "Save me!" a frantic voice called out to her, muffled slightly by the walls of the labyrinth. "Please, water!" Hasina's movements were hindered by the tight quarters, but she still tried to move to find the distressed man. They could hear one another, and he continued to call out to Hasina. But by the time she reached him, he had fallen silent, and his body, trapped beneath a pile of rubble, had gone limp. Hasina wanted to avoid the same fate, and so she crawled through the darkened cavern, her body being torn up by tiny shards of metal and jagged concrete edges. Crawling through the rubble, Hasina had no sense of time and saw only trickles of daylight in small cracks that supplied her with the minimal oxygen she had. As she sought a way out during her days trapped in the deadly maze, Hasina happened upon packs of cookies and small puddles of water, just enough provisions to get her through the 17 days she spent trapped in what could have been her grave. Hasina was rescued after being able to attract the attention of a rescue worker through a tiny crack. It was just big enough to fit a stick through, and the stick was just big enough for him to see. After her rescue, Hasina later found out that more than 1,000 of her co-workers had been killed. She was the only survivor to have been found.
It's a well-known fact that conditions in some factories are deplorable, and structural collapses aren't entirely uncommon. But what are the odds of surviving such a collapse, trapped under all that weight? Is it likely she'd survive while more than 1,000 of her co-workers were pulled from the rubble lifeless? Take a moment to tell us what you think in the comments section below, and vote by using the on-screen poll. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina ripped through southern Louisiana, leaving a wake of destruction and causing more than 1,500 deaths. Chip Delania was born and raised on the outskirts of New Orleans, but never expected that he'd find himself fighting for his life and nearly losing it.
When the alert bulletin started to sound, Chip regretted every decision that led to his partial immobility. The heavy cast on his leg kept him from moving at a pace he needed to, and his caretaker, a kind neighbor and the only person he really spoke to, was with her family, likely scrambling to plan their own escape. The native Louisianan started to pack what he could reach, but the more he struggled against his freshly broken leg, the more he realized just how futile his escape really would have been. When a desperate phone call to his neighbor went unsurprisingly unanswered, he realized just how alone he was going to be, and so he waited for the inevitable. The wind outside had been picking up for hours, the rain pounding against his fragile home. He and his tiny abode had survived hurricanes before, but unbeknownst to him, none had caused the same level of devastation that Katrina was threatening. Chip was shocked when the steady flow of water rocked his house and started to seep in through every crack. He didn't want to panic, but as the structure started to give way, it was all he could do. His cast felt like a brick as he struggled against the rising water and avoided the pieces of debris that were knocked loose from his home. He paddled as hard as he could, growing tired almost immediately. Before long, the current of the rushing water had taken him, dragging him through his devastated neighborhood. He reached for every piece of debris that passed him, but his strength wasn't enough to hold on and keep the water from pulling him. His mind wanted to black out, but the flowing water that pounded against his face, making it nearly impossible to breathe, kept him awake. Chip wound up getting caught against the submerged debris for what felt like forever, his body threatening to shut down every second that passed. Then he felt something pulling him back. The motions were too rough and jerky to be water, and it wasn't until he felt a strong hand grip his shoulder that he realized he wasn't alone. Then, through the chaos of everything around him, he heard a man's voice. The words were indistinguishable, but knowing he wasn't alone caused him to feel relief. Even if he did die, at least it wasn't by himself. But he wasn't going to die, at least not there. Another jolt of pain shot up from his leg as the unknown hero gave Chip one last tug, releasing him from his trap. Seconds later, Chip felt his back slide against a hard surface and heard more voices, speaking frantically. He tried to muster a thank you to his nameless savior, but he couldn't gather the strength. Chip simply laid still, silent and motionless. When a helicopter finally found the stranded group and airlifted them to safety, Chip moved his head enough to meet the eyes of the man that saved him and summoned the strength to force a smile.
Hurricane Katrina claimed many lives in 2005, but was Chip Delanio almost one of them? Are there people out there so alone that no one person would consider their safety in instances of an emergency? We'll find out in just a minute, but we want to know what you think in the comment section.
Are you ready to find out if you can decipher between fact or fiction? Let's look back at tonight's 3 stories and find out which were born from reality and which were fabrications of the imagination.
Our first tale follows what seemed like an impossible survival story during the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Anyone who knows their history will be able to confirm that the volcano did indeed erupt on May 18, 1980. But that doesn't mean Michael and Brandon are real, right? The fact of the matter is, their story did happen, only to Danny J. Balch and Brian Thomas. Balch and Thomas survived, along with their friends Sue Ruff and Bruce Nelson. 2 other friends, Karen Varner and Terry Krall, sadly, were killed in their tent. Looking at our second story of beating the odds, we were introduced to Hasina Anand, a seamstress in a garment factory. Did her terrifying tale of being trapped beneath rubble actually happen? Or are we just trying to frighten our claustrophobic listeners? For that answer, you may want to ask Reshma Begum, the Bangladesh woman that actually lived through Hasina's experience. Reshma survived for 17 days in the collapsed building on what little water she could find and 4 packs of cookies. As for that last story, where Chip Delano struggled against the power of Hurricane Katrina, many tales of heroism and tragedy came after Katrina made landfall, so it's plausible that Chip's was among them. Though it could have happened, it didn't. Mr. Delano's struggle is rooted in fiction, a creation of our own imaginations.
How well did you do in tonight's video? Did you look past the deception of our world and define the off-blurred line that struggles to separate lies from the truth? Let us know in the comment section below. And should you find the urge to test your perceptions again, be sure to subscribe and join us next time when we ask you to decide what's fact or fiction.